news from art experts.
Portland, Oregon, 97207.
Washington, D.C., a city that tonight is still frayed from the bitter fight over Clarence Thomas and disgusted by the gutter politics played out on Capitol Hill.
She will be injured and destroyed and belittled and hounded and harassed, real harassment.
People would blame the messenger for the message.
Senator. No, wait, let me just finish. I'm going to let you finish, and then I'm going to cut you off real quick.
This is not American. This is Kafkaesque.
All these interest groups have scratched through everything on earth to try and get something on you.
Being a black woman, you know you have to put up with a lot.
Who's telling the truth? Obviously, someone's not.
Tonight, major players in the Thomas drama, both those who were on center stage and some of those behind the scenes. Key senators, the lawyers for Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, the reporter who broke the story of Hill's allegations, the FBI official who's responsible for background checks, and representatives of special interest groups who lobbied the Senate.
This is a special edition of ABC News Nightline. A town meeting. A process run amok. Can it be fixed? Now reporting from Capitol Hill in Washington, Ted Koppel.
If this room looks vaguely familiar to you, it should. It is here that Robert Gates has been undergoing his trial by confirmation process on his likely way to becoming the next director of the CIA. It is here also that David Souter underwent questioning in the confirmation process that led to his becoming an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. The leadership of the Senate has been kind enough to let us borrow the room so that we can spend the next hour or so trashing the process. Not everyone, but almost everyone, seems to find some comfort these days in blaming the process for the sorry spectacle that ultimately, painfully, led yesterday to the confirmation of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. But it should be noted that if there is widespread agreement on the shabby state of the confirmation process, that is so only because each of us is convinced that someone else is to blame. You will likely hear a lot of that here this evening. But if we are extremely fortunate, we may also hear from one or two brave souls ready to accept some responsibility. That would be a major first step. Joining me here on the podium are Republican Senators Alan Simpson and Arlen Specter, both members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Paul Simon, a Democrat, also sits on the Judiciary Committee. Democratic Senator Bill Bradley is a member of the Intelligence Committee, which will vote this coming Friday on the nomination of Bob Gates to be CIA Director. Our audience is made up of invited guests, most of whom were involved either directly or indirectly in the battle over Clarence Thomas. Of all those we invited to participate in this broadcast, only the White House declined to play any part. Just to get a quick sense of where we're headed, let's begin by taking several quick questions or comments from our audience. And let me point out right away that I'm going to ask our panelists not to respond right now. I just want to give our audience at home a sense of what kinds of concerns are going to be reflected here. If we can begin in the back in the left there. Go ahead, sir.
I'm here with a group of students from across the country attending the National Young Leaders Conference. I'm a civic educator, and we spend a lot of time trying to educate and inspire young people about the public policy process in hopes that they'll follow in your footsteps. The last 2 weeks have not been a real good lesson. It's made great TV, but it hasn't been good government. How can you all put it back on a higher plane so that you will inspire future people to follow in your footsteps?
Let me point out that with each of these questions, sort of make a little mental note if you want to, because I hope we're going to be able to come back to them a little bit later in the broadcast. We're going to go to the back and the right.
My name is Cynthia Lebo, and I was formerly the General Counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee, a committee which handles some of the most controversial legislation which the Senate as a whole considers. And I'm very concerned that the Thomas confirmation fight became so bitter and so personalized that the committee itself will not be able to function, and that the investigation into the leaks will heighten that situation and make it even that much more difficult for the members of the committee and the staff to work together.
Now, in those instances where I recognize members of our audience, as I do in the case of Cliff Alexander here, I will try to introduce, but otherwise, if I don't, please don't be offended, and if you would be kind enough to introduce yourself not only by name, but also by title, either what you're doing or what you did that is in some respect relevant to what we're discussing tonight. Cliff Alexander is former Secretary of the Army.
Perhaps more relevant to tonight, I was also chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I often wonder how 100 white people, 2 women, could sit there, as the entire Judiciary Committee did, when accused of being lynchers, and none of them could respond. I wonder why, really, the entire U.S. Senate finds it impossible to discuss race, black to white, with honesty. And it seems to me that both political parties have to answer that question for all of America. And if there's going to be any improvement in the process, we have to start with the people who are part of that process and who have been dishonest with most of us.
And over here at our microphone at the front, Gary Bauer, who used to be with the White House. Gary, what are you doing these days?
Well, Ted, for the last couple of months, I headed up the Citizens Committee to confirm Clarence Thomas, and I guess I just would like to share a comment and get some response later on from it. I've been wondering what the lessons that the American people might have learned in the last week, and I'd like to suggest that one of those lessons is that the American people saw once again that the special interest groups in this city are way out of touch with the people they claim to represent. We had feminist groups claiming that women were going to be outraged by Judge Thomas's nomination and confirmation, and yet the polls showed basically no gender gap. We saw civil rights groups saying that Judge Thomas would be horrible for blacks, and yet the polls showed 65% support among African Americans. So I'd like to get some reaction as to whether people agree with me that perhaps the main lesson the American people have learned this week is that the groups in this town are way out of touch.
And when you speak of special interest groups, you're talking about those on the right as well as those on the left? I notice you only singled out those on the left.
Well, I wouldn't want to single out us since our position prevailed and the American people, according to the polls, agreed with the position that we took.
That's more or less how we'll be proceeding for most of the rest of the evening, with the notable exception, of course, that there will be answers or responses to some of the comments. But just to further set the tone, here's a reprise on where we've been from Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to help you God?
What we saw was not a hearing, but an inquisition.
From Tulsa, Oklahoma, saying, watch out for this woman.
I'm going to let you finish, and then I'm going to cut you off real quick.
Well, if you...
Unequivocally, uncategorically, that I deny each and every single allegation.
It's turned into a campaign of slander, not a quest for confirmation.
She show any signs at that time of being out of touch with reality?
Spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films involving such matters as
There's no proof that Anita Hill has perjured herself, and shame on anyone who suggests that she has.
The nomination of Clarence Thomas of Georgia to be Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court is hereby confirmed.
The vote on Clarence Thomas may have been close, but the verdict on the process was just about unanimous. If you heard it once during this confirmation battle, you heard it 100 times. The whole process has run amok. But is that true? And if it is true, how and why did it happen? And perhaps most important, what, if anything, can be done about it? Even before Anita Hill's charges turned Washington inside out, the complaints about the confirmation process were loud and often sounded like a grown-up version of "you started it first." For most Republicans, the Democratic Senate majority was out to deny the president the right to do what the people elected him to do, appoint justices that reflected his conservative philosophy.
Senator Kennedy, Senator Metzenbaum, and others are using the advise and consent clause and a perversion of the process to try to win in that process what they could not win at the ballot box.
For Democrats, it was the president playing politics with the court, picking in Clarence Thomas, a man of modest credentials and scholarship, whose race would pose a political dilemma for Democrats dependent on black voters. What about Robert Bork, Republicans replied. This judge of impeccable scholarly credentials was turned down by the Senate in 1987 after an openly political battle featuring television ads.
Robert Bork wants to be a Supreme Court justice. But the record shows that he has a strange idea of what justice is.
And an attack on Bork that was, to put it mildly, severe.
Robert Bork's America is a land in which women would be forced into back alley abortions, blacks would sit at segregated lunch counters.
However it started, political campaign tactics are now embedded in the advice and consent process. Well-regarded public relations consultants such as Ken Duberstein openly plan imagery and media strategy. Nominees, and for that matter congressional witnesses, pitch themselves as Horatio Alger heroes and heroines.
We lived in one room in a tenement. We shared a kitchen with other tenants.
I arrived in Washington 25 years ago this summer with everything I owned in the back of a 1965 Mustang and no money.
I was born on a farm in Okmulgee County, Oklahoma in 1956.
If character is now the key to the confirmation process, then attacks on character are also the coin of the realm. It was once unthinkable for former subordinates to attack a boss now up for a higher job. But that's exactly what happened when CIA nominee Robert Gates found himself publicly opposed by men and women who once worked for him.
Gates's role in this activity was to corrupt the process and the ethics of intelligence.
I think the atmosphere got in the way of allowing me to do my best.
It's almost unheard of for a new president to be denied a cabinet choice, especially if his choice is a 24-year veteran of the Senate. But when John Tower was nominated as defense secretary late in 1988, his downfall began at the hands of rock-ribbed conservative activist Paul Weyrich.
Over the course of many years, I have encountered the nominee in a condition, lack of sobriety, as well as with women who, to whom he was not married.
Every such rumor is magnified 1,000-fold by the omnipresent media. New reports, some true, some flatly false, fill the air. And what Clarence Thomas and his supporters may have demonstrated is that the best way to survive such charges is not to disprove them, but to attack on a different front.
As far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves.
It wasn't always like this. Once, men like Cordell Hull and Henry Stimson, John McCloy and Averell Harriman, men born to wealth and power, governed Washington with a strong sense of propriety, civility, and compromise, when senators like Republican Arthur Vandenberg crossed party lines to support a beleaguered Harry Truman.
Mr. Nunn.
Bipartisanship still happens today. 11 Democrats crossed party lines to back Clarence Thomas. 10 Democrats voted with President Bush earlier this year and provided his victory margin on the Gulf War use of force resolution in January. And Bush's first Supreme Court nominee, David Souter, sailed through the confirmation process almost without dissent.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back. Thank you, sir.
But fundamentally, Washington is a much more partisan town than it used to be, especially with a presidency that seems permanently Republican and a Congress that seems permanently Democratic. Indeed, hardball politics is often admired as much as criticized. Judiciary Committee Democrats have been pilloried this week for being too civil to Judge Thomas, while committee Republicans led an all-out assault on the credibility of Anita Hill.
Why did you wait 10 years? I repeat, 10 long years to bring this charge.
And because it all happens in the cold light of day, under the hot lights of the media, often used by officials as a conduit for their own political agenda, the very idea of a discreet, private resolution of sensitive or embarrassing accusations is just about impossible. The public may be appalled by what they see and hear in the press. An ABC News poll this week shows that the media got lower marks from the people than the Congress, the President, Republicans, or Democrats. But the media's presence in this process is unavoidable. Judiciary Committee Chairman Joe Biden put it this way yesterday.
I know of no system of government where when you add the kerosene of sex, the heated flame of race, and the incendiary nature of television lights, you are not going to have an explosion.
So what is to be done? Well, the Congress can try to plug leaks of sensitive materials, but in the past, that's failed utterly. The press can try to react less eagerly to sensational accusations. But that's like trying to repeal the law of gravity. And the political players on both sides of the aisle might try looking at important decisions as more than an occasion for wresting political advantage from each other, as something more than an occasion for the best soundbite or photo opportunity. 30 years ago, John Kennedy suggested that civility is not a sign of weakness. Today, those words seem drowned out by the motto of the late Leo DeRocher, nice guys finish last. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline.
Once again, we're broadcasting tonight from one of the Senate hearing rooms on Capitol Hill. With us, some of the major players in the Clarence Thomas drama, including key senators, lawyers for Clarence Thomas, and Anita Hill, special interest groups. We'll talk to them about the troubled confirmation process when we come back.
This ABC News special edition of Nightline, a town meeting, is brought to you by Jeep.
Well, here it is, gentlemen. Top of the world. Now, I put my camera here. Your vehicle would face out over the cliffs. What do you think? Look, if you plan to claim your vehicle's as good as a Jeep, you really need this shot in your commercial. How are we going to get our vehicle up here?
Helicopter.
We'll lift it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah.
Great. Let's go down and make some calls.
Same thing? Let's go. This is going to be a great commercial.
Introducing the Goodyear Buy 3, Get the 4th Tire free sale. Buy 3 Goodyear all-season radials, and you'll get the 4th tire free. Come on in before they all disappear.
At the Men's Warehouse, Navy blazers just $119. Lamb's wool sport coats, $139. Designer double-breasted, $189. Our prices will have you beside yourself. We guarantee it.
Even when it comes to luxury cars, there's nothing like word-of-mouth advertising.
Lincoln Town Car is the epitome of unabashed American-style luxury.
The people have spoken. America's #1 dream car is Lincoln Town Car.
Our readers' poll declared Lincoln Town Car as the best domestic automobile by a wide margin.
See your 5-star Lincoln Mercury dealer.
This woman chose to give birth in her home with her family sharing in the experience. The father even delivered the new family member. Tomorrow, meet families who've experienced home births. Join us for AM Northwest tomorrow at 9 on Channel 2.
Danger in a coffee pot from a deadly defect the appliance maker knew about. Hundreds of thousands are still out there, maybe in your home. Prime time, Thursday.
I've been harmed worse than I've ever been harmed in my life. I wasn't harmed by the Klan. I wasn't harmed by the Knights of Camellia. I wasn't harmed by the Aryan race. I wasn't harmed by a racist group. I was harmed by this process.
And we're back live once again from Capitol Hill, and now instead of just having these statements, comments, or questions being made without response, we have several members of public interest groups standing at our microphones right now. Ralph Nader, I'd like to begin with you and have you make whatever your comment is or whatever question you have, and then we'll have some of our distinguished senators up here respond.
Well, I'm glad to use the word public interest groups. There have been too many references to special interest groups. Special interest groups have a commercial motive. Public interest groups can be on the right and left, reflecting their conscience. So it's good to clear the language said. Thank you. My concern is how the nomination process and the hearings often comes down, in terms of the public memory and the focus of the members of the committee, to one controversy or one statement or one episode, thereby replacing a broader evaluation of the nominee, which is supposed to be based on character, qualification, and record. Judge Thomas was an enthusiastic and a supporter and participant in the Reagan, Bush, Ed Meese ideology. He had a record. He had a very detailed record over the last 10 years. This ideology has 3 quick components. One, centralization of power in the presidency vis-a-vis the legislative and judicial branch. Two, a very light regulatory hand on business abuse and crime, witness savings and loan and procurement scandals in Wall Street. And three, a restriction on the rights of individuals to use the law to challenge the abuses of both government and business. And unfortunately, the public memory, Ted, was almost entirely removed from that detailed record and focused on the serious but single episode of the hearing. As a result...
Let me just interrupt you, because yes. I'm not going to single you out for this. If anyone goes on too long, I want to give as many people as possible a chance to respond. Whom are you blaming for that?
I am putting responsibility both on the committee members who should have, in the last phase of this hearing, spent some time rounding out their respective views on the record of the candidate. I'm putting some responsibility on the media when they should have rounded it out so that the public memory had a more wholesome panorama of the full qualifications or lack thereof of the nominee.
Senator Specter, do you think ultimately by the time the Senate voted, it really was voting on the whole record of Judge Thomas, or had we by then become so focused upon the issue of sexual harassment that ultimately the vote was almost cast on that issue alone?
I think we voted on the whole record. The items that Mr. Nader talks about were focal points of our examination. We questioned him on his view that Congress was not a deliberative body and that there had to be broader authority in the executive. I asked him questions about the president's authority as commander-in-chief contrasted with the congressional authority to declare war. I went very deeply into the questions of affirmative action. I talked about his respect for individual rights as a defendant. When the hearings ended, I, as well as many others, I waited until they were all over, announced my position, made a detailed floor statement on why I was voting for him. Did so again at the committee meeting. And then in the latter phase, we focused on the charges by Professor Hill. But I started my statement yesterday reviewing the educational, intellectual, and professional qualifications, and then moving on to the more immediate issue as to Professor Hill.
Van Wattenberg.
I wanted to comment on my former colleague Cliff Alexander's remark about the lynch mob. The lynch mob, as I understand it, and as I believe it to be, that Judge Thomas was talking about, just for the record, was not black-white, but the end of that statement, he was talking about the lynch mob strikes when somebody refuses to, and I think his phrase was, kowtow to the old order. And that's what has been going on in American politics for several decades now. The liberal cause activist groups, when they can't win on substance, they can't win on politics, they can't win in the court of public opinion, fight the substantive battle that Ralph Nader talked about. But when they lose that, go to scandalization and go to criminalization. And we've seen it, while there was some merit in all of these things, we've seen it in my judgment, in Watergate and in Iran-Contra and in Clarence Thomas, that they go to this scandalization process, which you gain some quick benefit from, because you get the whip word, racist, sexist, polluter, crook, liar, but it's been killing liberals. The real vote in America was not 52-48, which was what happened in the Senate, but was 2-1 in favor of Clarence Thomas on the substance. People, voters in the United States, understood that beneath all the scandal mongering, Clarence Thomas, to put the simple spin on it, to use the vernacular, that Clarence Thomas was against quotas and his political harassers were in favor of quotas. That there is a real substantive issue, a series of substantive issues, and the liberal activist cause groups are poisoning the Democratic Party. And now they have managed, in a incredible feat, to even figure out a way to hurt Democrats among blacks in America.
Senator Bradley, why don't you?
Well, I think that Ben took a very narrow view of the whole process himself. I mean, I think if the system is going to work, all players have to respect the process. And that includes the President of the United States. I think in the Clarence Thomas nomination, it began by the President of the United States saying that he's the best person for the job in a country with 700,000 lawyers, 10,000 judges, and 5,000 law professors, and then denying that race played any factor. I think people looked at that and at the beginning said, look, this isn't true. And then I think it was compounded when the PR specialist entered the picture, counseling Judge Thomas on how he should answer questions at the Judiciary Committee hearings. So if you look only narrowly at the congressional process, the senatorial process, I don't think that you're seeing it broad enough. We need candor in American politics, and I think that begins with the president.
Well, go ahead, Senator.
Yes, if I could just... First, Cliff Alexander's point is a very valid point. We have no African Americans in the United States Senate. We're sitting in the only place in the world where people where they vote freely, where people in the capital city are not represented in the parliamentary body. That can be corrected. In terms of Ben's comments, the reality, this didn't come out of liberal special interest groups. It came because one woman reluctantly answered the question of a staff member, and things developed from there. It was not some grand scheme, some great conspiracy by liberal groups.
No, but there is a sense, Senator Simon, that that woman was sought out, that Anita Hill was sought out, because, as a couple of people have now charged, the Democrats weren't able to win this one on the issues, that there was a sort of desperation at work here.
But that is because the process broke down, not just at the congressional level.
Well, are you first of all conceding the legitimacy of that point?
Well, no, I am saying that it broke down in part because the President of the United States ignored the advice part of it. The President of the United States ought to, as many presidents have done, bring in a few key senators and say, these are the people I'm thinking about. You have other suggestions? So that there really is an advice and consent process as the Constitution suggested. And we would not have even had the acrimony that we had prior to the last few days.
Senator Simpson.
Well, it is, it really, you've used the word civility. And I have a great tendency to lash out when I see someone, yeah, well, don't worry, plenty of you do too. So let's not lose any sleep about this one. I mean, in the last few days, I've had people refuse to shake my hand. I've been cursed, sworn at, called menacing, evil, bitter, foul, poop head, you know. And then I'm supposed to sit back and smile benignly, and then people say, you're getting hard, Alan, and evil, and we're wondering what's happened to you. I say, well, either I'm going to get consumed in the process and just get sucked up and spit out like a husk, or by God, you get in there and fight. And that's what Clarence Thomas finally did, and he got on the Supreme Court. If he'd just sat there, he wouldn't be on the Supreme Court. But at some point in time, there is a point where everybody ought to think one simple thing. It's so corny, so naive. How would you feel if this was happening to you?
Senator, you've raised what may indeed be the central point of this evening, and that is whether the process has deteriorated to such a point that no one now is capable of restoring the kind of civility that you talk about. I'd like to pick up on that point when we come back, and we have a number of people at our microphones. We'll continue with this discussion in just a moment.
This ABC News special edition of Nightline, a town meeting, will continue in a moment.